Have you ever had the gnawing sensation that your life is fundamentally off track, yet you lack the words to articulate precisely what is wrong? It's a feeling that no matter how fiercely you fight to evolve, an invisible tether yanks you back into the same detrimental patterns, the same self-defeating behaviors, the same cycles of hope and despair. Perhaps you recognize it in that insidious inner voice, the one that whispers sabotage, just as you're about to seize a significant achievement, persuading you that retreat is safer than triumph. Or maybe it manifests as that white-hot, irrational anger that erupts from nowhere, consuming you in situations that, in hindsight, were trivial at best. It could be the envy you vehemently deny feeling, but which silently corrodes your spirit when you witness another person attaining something you secretly covet. Or that paralyzing dread of failure that keeps you hiding behind a fortress of excuses and procrastination. What you have failed to grasp is that none of this is accidental. There is a formidable force operating in the subterranean depths of your mind, meticulously sculpting your personality, dictating your reactions, and even rigging your choices. This is a force you have spent an entire lifetime pretending does not exist, but one that has never for a moment ceased its activity. The great explorer of the psyche, Carl Jung, gave it a name, the shadow. It is the hidden dimension of your being, the psychic landfill where you have buried every part of yourself you didn't want to confront, your repressed ambitions, your vulnerabilities, your shamas, your darkest emotions. Everything you once concealed in order to be deemed acceptable by the world. But herein lies the fundamental problem. That which you ignore, you empower. The shadow does not vanish simply because you refuse to look at it. On the contrary, the more you reject its existence, the more it swells in the underground of your mind, biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to surge to the surface. It emerges when you detonate in rage for no apparent reason. When you push away those you love and then stand in the wreckage, wondering why you are perpetually alone. It speaks when you judge others with venom, failing to realize you are merely projecting onto them the very qualities you most fear within yourself. It acts when you sabotage your own success, fail on purpose, and in the aftermath, convince yourself that you were never truly good enough to even try. As Jung himself declared, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you refuse to confront your shadow, it will continue to pull the strings from behind the curtain while you naively believe that your life is a series of random events. But if you can summon the courage to look inward, if you are willing to face what you have eternally avoided, you can transform this shadow from your greatest liability into your most profound source of power. And that is precisely the journey we are embarking on now. Prepare yourself because this path will not be comfortable. But if you genuinely wish to shatter the cycle of self-sabotage and reclaim command of your life, this is the only way forward. Let us begin. From the moment you drew your first breath, you were indoctrinated with a rulebook of acceptability. From your earliest years, you learned that some emotions were permissible for public display, while others had to be hidden away. You might not consciously remember the specific instances, but the commands are etched into your psyche. Stop crying, don't be weak. Don't be angry, be a good person. Don't be so selfish, you have to share. And so, piece by piece, entire segments of your authentic self were disowned and repressed. What became of your righteous anger, your profound sadness, your innate desire to assert your own needs? What happened to those primal impulses that did not conform to the polished image of the right person the world demanded you to be? They did not simply evaporate. They were forcibly shoved into the deepest recesses of your unconscious, forming what Carl Jung termed the shadow, that hidden repository of your personality where all the feelings, desires, and impulses you disown to gain social acceptance are stored. The shadow is not some abstract or distant philosophical concept. It is alive within you, right now, operating as the puppet master behind the scenes of your mind. Every time you feel an inexplicable discomfort around someone who is unapologetically confident, It may be because deep down, you have repressed your own yearning for self-expression. When you find yourself harshly criticizing someone for seeking recognition, it may be because a desire to be seen resides within you, but it has been buried under thick layers of self-denial. When you feel a pang of envy at another's success, it could be because you have stifled your own ambition, perhaps because someone once told you that wanting too much was a form of arrogance. And so, without ever realizing it, you navigate the world like an iceberg. The part that others witness is merely the visible tip, but the vast, dominant mass of who you truly are remains submerged beneath the surface, invisible even to yourself. But ignoring the shadow does not neutralize its influence. In fact, the more you deny it, the more destructively it manifests in your life, in your irrational fears, in your compulsion to repeat the same mistakes in a resentment you cannot trace to its source, in toxic patterns that repeat like a cursed endless cycle. The real question is not whether you possess a shadow. The question is, to what degree is it in command of your life without your consent? But how, exactly, does this hidden aspect of your mind manipulate you and ensnare you in patterns that feel impossible to break? In the next part, we will dive into the subtle and destructive methods your shadow employs without you ever noticing. And once you see them, you will no longer be able to ignore them. Have you ever seriously questioned why certain destructive patterns relentlessly repeat in your life? Why, even when you pour all your energy into changing, you seem to inevitably end up back at square one? Why do you feel surges of anger, envy, or fear without a clear, rational cause? All of this occurs because your shadow is not dormant. It is in control. And the most sinister part is that it acts without your awareness. The shadow does not engage in direct confrontation. It does not shout. It does not announce its presence. Instead, it operates with surgical subtlety, silently manipulating your emotions, your choices, and your reactions. It functions like a ghost within your own machine, distorting your perception of reality. You believe you are the captain of your own ship, but in truth, you are being steered by hidden currents of impulse that were buried decades ago. One of the most common ways the shadow manifests is through the mechanism of projection. Have you ever felt an inexplicable, visceral hatred for someone? Have you ever criticized an individual with an intensity that was wildly disproportionate to their actual offense? This happens because we so often see in others what we refuse to admit in ourselves. For example, a person who was conditioned to suppress their own ambition may feel an irrational contempt for those who openly strive for success. Someone who fears their own capacity for aggression may despise people who are direct and assertive. Instead of acknowledging these traits within themselves, they project them outward and attack. Another devastating mechanism of the shadow is self-sabotage. This occurs when, on an unconscious level, you actively erect barriers to your own growth. You procrastinate at crucial junctures. You abandon your goals prematurely. You repeatedly make poor choices, all because a part of you believes you do not deserve success or is terrified of the consequences of change. This explains the tragic phenomenon of people who fail just when they are on the cusp of a major achievement. The shadow acts as an invisible gatekeeper, preventing you from ever leaving your comfort zone, even if that comfort zone is your own unhappiness. And its influence does not stop there. The shadow profoundly manifests in your relationships. Have you ever noticed how some individuals seem to be magnets for the same type of toxic partner? How some people always find themselves in friendships that are ultimately destructive? This occurs because, without realizing it, we project our unresolved traumas and unconsciously seek out situations that reinforce our deepest-seated fears. If you possess a shadow laden with feelings of rejection, you may find yourself drawn to people who are guaranteed to reinforce that sense of being rejected. If you carry a shadow filled with insecurity, you may connect with individuals who ensure you are always left doubting your own worth. And the most insidious part is that the shadow can hijack your very identity without you realizing it. You convince yourself that this is just the way I am, that your ways of acting and feeling are innate, when in reality, they have been molded by an accumulation of repressed experiences. You start to believe you are simply unlucky, that you have always been an anxious person, that you were never good enough, when in reality, you are merely living under the potent influence of this hidden part of yourself. But if the shadow wields so much power over you, the obvious question arises, how can we recognize the signs that we are being dominated by it? How can we know if it is not ourselves in control, but rather this dark aspect of our psyche? In the next segment, we will delve into the clear and undeniable signs that your shadow is manipulating your life without you realizing it. And once you see these signs, it will be impossible to continue pretending that it does not exist. If your life feels perpetually stuck in a loop of repetition, if you are in a constant state of frustration, anxiety, or feel unable to alter certain behaviors, then it is highly probable that your shadow is in control without your awareness. But how can you be certain? How can you identify the clear signals that this hidden part of your psyche is manipulating your choices and silently sabotaging your life? The first piece of glaring evidence of the shadow's dominance is constant projection. Have you ever noticed that certain people seem to irritate you far more than is reasonable? That specific traits in others provoke a disproportionate emotional reaction within you. This happens because the shadow forces you to see in others what you refuse to accept in yourself. Someone who has repressed their own need for attention may feel an irrational disdain for people who express themselves freely and seek the spotlight. A person who rejects their own aggressive impulses may be excessively bothered by those who are more direct and assertive. The problem is that as long as you fail to recognize that this irritation originates from within, you will continue to blame the external world for your own internal conflicts. Another telltale sign that the shadow is in control is relentless self-sabotage. Have you ever been on the verge of achieving a significant goal, only to have everything suddenly start to unravel? As if, by some unseen mechanism, you were engineering your own defeat? This occurs because the shadow is terrified of change. If at some point in your life, you were taught to believe that you do not deserve success, love, or happiness, this repressed belief will continue to operate in the background of your mind, finding subtle ways to ensure that you never transcend those self-imposed limits. This is precisely why so many people give up just when they are about to achieve something truly meaningful. The third symptom of an uncontrolled shadow is the repetitive attraction to toxic relationships. If you consistently find yourself involved with the same type of person, someone who devalues you, ignores you, or uses you, this is not a matter of coincidence. There is something within you that seeks out this dynamic, even without your conscious realization. If you experienced rejection in childhood, you may spend your entire adult life unconsciously seeking out partners who reinforce that core wound of rejection. If you grew up being taught to repress your own anger, you may find yourself drawn to people who abuse your patience, simply because your shadow has found an indirect and safe way to express that repressed energy. Moreover, a powerful indicator that the shadow is dominating your life is an irrational fear of judgment. Are you terrified of being criticized? Do you avoid exposing your true self as much as possible, fearing that you might look ridiculous? If so, your shadow is likely filled with repressed shame. Perhaps at some point in your past, you learned that making mistakes was unacceptable, that being authentic meant risking rejection. The result is a lifetime lived on the defensive, perpetually trying to please others, constantly attempting to avoid any possibility of being seen as flawed. But this fear does not originate in the present. It is a ghost of the past, a remnant of everything that has been denied and buried deep within you. Finally, one of the cruelest signs of the shadow's influence is an inexplicable sense of emptiness. Have you ever felt that something vital is missing from your life, even when, on paper, everything seems to be fine? As if there is a part of you that is never satisfied, that always feels a fundamental absence. This happens because, over the course of your life, You have had to amputate parts of yourself to be accepted by the world. You repressed your true desires, your deepest ambitions, your authenticity, and now, even without knowing precisely why, you feel the profound weight of that absence. But if these signs resonate deeply with you, it does not mean that all is lost. On the contrary, recognizing the shadow is the first essential step toward regaining control of your life. The real danger is not in having a shadow, because we all do. The danger lies in continuing to live without any awareness of it. But now comes the critical question. What happens if you continue to ignore your shadow? What occurs when it becomes so repressed that it explodes in unpredictable and destructive ways? In the next segment, we will explore the high cost of living in denial and why ignoring your shadow may be the single greatest mistake of your life. The shadow you choose to ignore does not simply disappear. It accumulates, it strengthens, and it waits. The more you deny its existence, the more inventive it becomes in finding ways to manifest itself. And if you do not take conscious control, these manifestations can become catastrophic. You can spend years pretending that certain emotions and impulses are not part of you, but there will come a day when everything that has been repressed will surge to the surface. And when that happens, you will have no choice but to confront the devastating consequences. One of the greatest dangers of ignoring your shadow is that it always finds a way to escape its cage. If you continually repress your anger, it may erupt as an uncontrolled explosion at the most inopportune moment, destroying relationships, careers, and opportunities in a single fiery blast. If you hide your deepest desires, they may emerge in self-destructive behaviors, in addictions, compulsions, or excesses. If you bury your traumas, they may manifest as crippling anxiety crises, panic attacks, or even inexplicable physical symptoms that medical science cannot explain. And do not be mistaken, the shadow is not confined to your inner life. It actively shapes your external reality. If you do not acknowledge your deep-seated fear of abandonment, you may end up desperately clinging to toxic relationships, choosing guaranteed misery over the potential pain of loneliness. If you deny your own ambition, you may unconsciously sabotage yourself professionally, convincing yourself that success is simply not for people like you. If you hide your authentic desires, you may become lost in a silent, gnawing frustration, unable to comprehend why your life feels so profoundly unsatisfactory. But the greatest danger of all is this: if you do not integrate your shadow, it may end up staging a hostile takeover of your entire personality. Have you ever encountered someone who seems to be completely consumed by their own resentment? Someone who perpetually sees others as the guilty party, who carries a silent, simmering anger, who lives on the defensive, always poised to attack. These people were not born this way. They have simply spent their entire lives repressing their pain until, one day, their shadows grew so powerful that they seized total control. The result is an endless, self-perpetuating cycle of resentment, fear, and self-sabotage. And perhaps the most tragic outcome of all is depersonalization, the phenomenon of feeling like a stranger within your own body, as if you are disconnected from who you truly are. This occurs because, by repressing your shadow, you are also repressing fundamental parts of yourself. You attempt to be only the good side, eliminating any trace of darkness, without realizing that you are cutting away essential pieces of your own psyche. Over time, this leads to a constant, hollow feeling of emptiness, as if something is missing, but you cannot identify what it is. But then, the inevitable question arises: how does one escape this vicious cycle? How do you stop being a victim of your own shadow and begin to integrate it consciously? In the next segment, you will discover the keys to transforming your shadow from a hidden enemy into a powerful ally, and thus finally take command of your own life. Now that you comprehend the peril of ignoring your shadow, the most important question of all emerges: how do you bring it into the light? How do you cease being manipulated by these hidden facets of your psyche, and instead begin to use them to your advantage? Integrating the shadow does not mean destroying or eliminating it. because that is an impossible task. What Jung teaches us is that the shadow is not our enemy. On the contrary, it contains essential parts of who we are, dormant forces that can become our greatest source of power if we learn how to access them. The problem has never been the shadow itself, but rather our stubborn denial of it. The first step to integrating it is to consciously recognize it. This means paying meticulous attention to your emotional triggers. When something or someone provokes an exaggerated reaction in you, you must stop and ask, what does this intense reaction say about me? Instead of reflexively blaming the other person, you must turn your gaze inward. If someone irritates you because they seem arrogant, is it possible that this person is merely expressing a level of confidence that you yourself have repressed? If you feel contempt for those who chase success, is there not a part of you that also yearns for that, but has been suffocated by limiting beliefs you adopted long ago? The second step is to allow yourself to feel what has been denied. If you have spent your entire life pretending you do not feel anger, it is time to look at that feeling without fear. This does not mean you should go around exploding at people. It means sitting with yourself in quiet solitude and admitting the truth. Yes, I feel anger. Yes, I feel envy. Yes, I am afraid. And that is okay. The shadow only dominates you when you try to pretend it doesn't exist. When you face it head on, it loses the covert control it held over you. A powerful tool for this process is reflective writing. Take a notebook and begin to jot down your deepest thoughts, completely uncensored. Ask yourself probing questions. What aspects of myself do I reject? What behaviors in others do I judge with the most severity? What do I fear most that others might discover about me? Writing about these issues can be profoundly uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. By giving your shadow a name, you bring it into the light of consciousness, and what is conscious can be managed. Another essential method is visualization and internal dialogue. Jung suggested that we should talk to our shadow as if it were a separate entity. It may sound strange, but it is a remarkably effective technique. Close your eyes and imagine this repressed part of you. What does it look like? What does it want to tell you? Often, when we finally give a voice to our shadow, we discover that it is not a monster, but rather a forgotten, wounded part of ourselves that simply wants to be heard and acknowledged. But integrating the shadow is not an instantaneous process. It is a continuous journey that demands immense courage and radical honesty. The most important thing to understand is that your darkness does not have to be your enemy. Repressed anger can be transformed into the strength to set boundaries. Fear can be transmuted into wisdom. Desire can become the fuel for creativity. Everything that has been denied can be repurposed as fuel for your personal growth. Now that you know how to begin integrating your shadow, the final question arises, why is this so rare? Why do so few people have the courage to look within? In the last segment, we will explore why most people choose denial and illusion, and how you can become the exception, someone who truly awakens to who they really are. At this point, you are aware that the shadow exists within you, whether you like it or not. You can choose to continue denying its existence, pretending that your fears, insecurities, and repressed impulses do not affect the course of your life. Or, you can make the decision that very few people have the courage to make, to look within and reclaim absolute control of your own psyche. But before you move forward, there is something you must understand with perfect clarity. Most people will never do this work. The vast majority will continue to repeat the same mistakes, live out the same cycles of self-sabotage, and blame the world for their problems. They will remain shackled to the past, feeding their resentments, projecting their frustrations onto others, and convincing themselves that fate or society is responsible for their failures. They will never possess the courage to confront the unvarnished truth about themselves. But you can. If you have made it this far, if you have followed every step of this journey, it signifies that something deep inside you knows that change is not just possible, but necessary. It means you are tired of being a prisoner of unconscious patterns, weary of feeling dominated by forces you do not understand. It means you are ready to take the step that few dare to take, to integrate your shadow and become who you are truly meant to be. But do not be deceived. This path is not for the faint of heart. To see your shadow means surrendering the comfortable illusion that you already know everything about yourself. It means confronting past pains, facing unpleasant truths, and admitting that much of what happens in your life is your own responsibility. This process can be profoundly uncomfortable, but it is also the only authentic path to liberation. The question now is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you simply absorb this information and then carry on with your life as if nothing has happened? Or will you actually put it into practice? If something in this video resonated with you on a deep level, tell me in the comments. What part of your shadow do you now realize you have been ignoring? Have you noticed repetitive patterns in your life that can now be explained by this concept? Share your experience, because the very act of speaking about it is a first step toward bringing it into consciousness. And more importantly, do not stop here. The next video will take you even deeper into another essential piece of this puzzle. If you are truly serious about evolving, you cannot afford to ignore it. So keep watching, because this knowledge may very well be the missing key to transforming your entire life.